When I was 24, I had to move out of state for a new job. I was excited but also a little nervous as I didn't know anyone in the area. I needed to find a place to live quickly, and I wanted something affordable that wouldn't break the bank. I posted on several roommate-finding websites and apps, including Facebook and Craigslist, hoping to find someone who had a room available. A guy named Tom reached out to me on Facebook saying he had a room for rent in his house. I checked out his profile and photos. He looked like a normal guy and nothing seemed off. I was open to having a male roommate, despite my parents' concerns about the situation. Tom and I set up a video call, during which he gave me a virtual tour of the house. It was a modest 2-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood, just a 15-minute drive from my new job. Tom seemed nice enough during our conversation. Friendly but not overly familiar. His rent price was reasonable and his house rules were simple. No smoking, no loud music after 10 p.m., and clean up after yourself. He said the room was available right away, which was perfect for me since I needed to move in quickly. We agreed on the terms, and a week later I packed up my things and drove down to my new home. When I arrived, Tom greeted me out front and handed me the key to the house. He was shorter than I expected, and his voice was softer in person, but he seemed friendly enough. He helped me carry my heavier bags inside and showed me to my room. The room was already furnished, which was convenient, and Tom mentioned that his previous roommate had moved out a few weeks earlier. I spent the rest of the day settling in, replacing the pillows and bed sheets with my own and unpacking my clothes. The next day was a Sunday, and Tom offered to show me around town. I wasn't particularly eager to spend the day with him, but I agreed, thinking it would be a good way to get off on the right foot with my new roommate. He drove me around, pointing out the shopping centers, restaurants, and parks in the area. Then he suggested we grab lunch at a local diner. I wasn't really hungry, but I didn't want to be rude, so I agreed. During lunch, I noticed that Tom was a bit pushy. He kept asking personal questions, and when I didn't respond with the enthusiasm he seemed to expect, he would go quiet and sulk. It was a little uncomfortable, but I figured he was just trying to be friendly. That week, I started my new job, and my focus shifted to adjusting to my work routine. It wasn't until a few days later, when I did my laundry, that I noticed something strange. My clothes in the hamper seemed to have been moved around, like someone had gone through them. Then, I realized something was missing. One of my bras. I searched my room top to bottom but couldn't find it anywhere. A disturbing thought crossed my mind. What if Tom had taken it? But I refused to believe it. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, and there was no way I could confront him without proof. Still, I felt uneasy, and I wished there was a lock on my bedroom door. That weekend, while Tom was out, I went to the hardware store and bought a lockable doorknob. I installed it myself, feeling a bit more secure knowing I could lock my door when I wasn't home. I planned to tell Tom about it the next time I saw him, but that night he didn't come home. His work schedule seemed unpredictable, and he often stayed out late. Then around 1:30 a.m., I was woken up by loud banging on my bedroom door. It was Tom, and he was yelling my name. He sounded angry. I pretended to be asleep, too scared to open the door. I had a feeling it had to do with the new doorknob. The next morning, I woke up to several texts from Tom saying we needed to talk. I replied asking if it was about the doorknob, and he responded with a curt, "Yes." I apologized and explained that I installed it for privacy, as I was uncomfortable without a lock. His tone softened a bit, but he still insisted that I remove the lock and put the old doorknob back on. I was confused and upset, but I didn't want to escalate the situation. I changed the doorknob back later that day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Tom had tried to come into my room that night. The thought scared me. How had he even known about the new doorknob unless he had tried to enter my room while I was sleeping? A few days later, there was a knock on the door. It was a woman around my age, and she looked worried. She asked if I was living with Tom, and when I said yes, she urged me to leave immediately. She explained that Tom had multiple restraining orders against him from different women, and he had a history of stalking and harassment. I was shocked. She told me she had seen me moving in and wanted to warn me, but had waited until Tom wasn't home. I thanked her, feeling a rush of fear. I knew I had to get out of there. I started packing my things and contacted a woman who had posted an ad for a sublet across town. She told me I could move in right away, which was a huge relief. I texted Tom, telling him I needed to move out due to a family emergency. He didn't reply for a while, but when he got home, he asked me about my text. I repeated my story, and he said he'd give me my rent money back the next day after going to the bank. I was relieved, but about an hour later, he knocked on my door and asked, "Did someone say something to you?" My heart raced, but I played dumb, saying no. He stared at me for a moment, then said, "It just seems like you're running away for another reason." I insisted it was just the family emergency, and he reluctantly accepted my explanation. For that night, things took a terrifying turn. I woke up in the middle of the night to find Tom sitting on the end of my bed. I screamed, but he put his hand over my mouth and shushed me. He insisted he wasn't going to hurt me, and that I shouldn't believe what others had said about him. I was terrified and begged him to leave, but he just kept talking, trying to convince me that he wasn't a threat. I managed to get out of bed and ran for the door. Tom yelled at me to stop, but I bolted outside with my phone and called the police. I hid in the bushes until they arrived. When the police showed up, I explained everything. They made Tom come outside and questioned him. He tried to act normal, but one of the officers later told me that Tom had been arrested before for similar incidents. I packed up the rest of my things while the police were there and left the house. Tom did give me back my rent money, but I didn't care about that. I was just glad to be out of there. When I first moved to Chicago, I was excited about starting a new job and finally living in a big city. The apartment I found was a decent 2-bedroom place in Lincoln Park. Nothing fancy, but clean and affordable. The only catch was that I needed a roommate to help cover the rent. I thought I'd lucked out when I found Kevin through a popular roommate finding app. He seemed nice enough, professional, easygoing, and with a stable job as a software developer. We met for coffee, hit it off, and within a week he moved in. For the first few weeks, everything seemed perfect. Kevin was quiet, kept to himself, and paid his share of the rent on time. We didn't hang out much, but that was fine by me. We were both busy with work and our own lives. It was nice to come home to a peaceful apartment after a long day. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, strange things started happening. It began with little things. I'd noticed that some of my mail was missing, or that my documents seemed to have been moved. At first, I chalked it up to my absent-mindedness. I had a lot going on, and I figured I was just misplacing things. But then, one morning I received a call from my bank about unusual activity on my credit card. Someone had charged several expensive items to my account, all from a high-end electronics store across town. Panicked, I immediately canceled the card and reported the fraud. I tried remembering when I might have lost my card, but nothing made sense. I always kept it in my wallet, either in my pocket or safely tucked away in my room. The only other person with access to the apartment was Kevin. I confronted him about it that evening. "Hey Kevin, have you seen my credit card lying around? There were some fraudulent charges made, and I can't figure out how it happened." Kevin looked genuinely surprised. "Of course not, I haven't seen it at all. But that's weird though, maybe someone stole your info online, that happens sometimes." His response seemed sincere, and I didn't want to accuse him without proof. But something about the situation felt off. I decided to keep a closer eye on my belongings and be more vigilant about my personal information. Over the next few weeks, more unsettling things started happening. I noticed that my social security card, which I kept hidden in a locked drawer, had been moved. My passport was also missing for a couple of days before mysteriously reappearing in the same drawer. Whenever I mentioned these things to Kevin, he acted concerned and offered to help me look for the missing items, but nothing ever turned up. One night, I was working late on a project for my job when I received an email from a credit monitoring service. It alerted me to a new credit card application made in my name. I hadn't applied for any new cards. Someone was trying to steal my identity. Fear gripped me as I realized what was happening. I immediately called the credit card company and had the application canceled. Then, I started putting the pieces together. Kevin was the only one who had access to my personal information, He had to be the one behind this. But why? And how? I knew I needed to gather more evidence before confronting him. I began discreetly checking Kevin's room when he wasn't home, looking for anything that could link him to the identity theft. It wasn't easy. Kevin was meticulous and his room was always tidy. But one day I found a small notebook hidden under his mattress. The notebook was filled with my personal information, social security number, bank account details, credit card numbers. There were also notes about my daily routine, including when I left for work, when I came home, and even the passwords to some of my online accounts. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, horrified by how much he knew about me. It was clear that Kevin had been watching me, studying me, and planning this for who knows how long. I felt violated, betrayed, and terrified all at once. I needed to get out of this situation, but I couldn't just leave. Kevin was still in the apartment, and I didn't know what he was capable of. I decided to play it cool and act like nothing was wrong. That evening, I pretended everything was normal, chatting with Kevin about our days and making small talk. Inside, I was panicking, trying to figure out my next move. The following day, I took a personal day off work and went to the police. I brought the notebook with me and explained everything that had been happening. They advised me to change all my passwords, secure my financial accounts, and, most importantly, not to confront Kevin directly. The police began their investigation, but I knew it could take time before they had enough evidence to arrest him. Meanwhile, I couldn't stand the thought of staying in the apartment with Kevin for another night. I packed a bag and told him I was going out of town for a work trip. He didn't seem suspicious, but I could see him watching me closely as I left. For the next few days, I stayed with a friend, checking in with the police regularly. They discovered that Kevin had a history of identity theft and fraud in other states, using different aliases to avoid detection. They also found that he had been slowly draining money from my accounts, making small, unnoticeable withdrawals over time. It wasn't long before the police had enough to arrest Kevin. They executed the arrest while he was at home, catching him off guard. I was relieved when they called to tell me he was in custody, but I couldn't shake the fear that had settled deep inside me. When I finally returned to the apartment, it felt different. I packed up my things and decided to move out. I couldn't stay in a place where I'd been so thoroughly violated, where someone had invaded every aspect of my life. As I settled into a new apartment in a different part of the city, I tried to put the experience behind me. But the scars remained, and I found it hard to trust anyone, especially new roommates. It was my senior year of college, and I had moved into an off-campus apartment in a small student housing complex. I didn't know anyone there, so the school paired me with a random roommate. His name was Mark, and at first, he seemed like a decent guy. He was polite, always had a smile on his face, and made an effort to be friendly. We got along well enough in the beginning, but it didn't take long for me to start noticing some strange things about him. Mark had this habit of lingering in my room far too often. He'd come in to chat, but the conversations always veered into personal territory, with him asking intrusive questions about my life. He'd also touch my stuff, like my books and clothes, without asking, which made me uncomfortable. At first, I tried to brush it off as harmless curiosity, but it started to bother me more as time went on. Then there were the strange noises I'd hear coming from Mark's room late at night. It sounded like he was talking to someone, but his voice was low and muffled. Sometimes I'd hear shuffling noises, like he was moving things around. I tried to convince myself that it was just him watching TV or talking on the phone, but deep down I felt uneasy. One night I couldn't sleep because the noises from Mark's room were louder than usual. Curious and a little worried, I decided to investigate. I crept down the hallway and pressed my ear against his door, trying to hear what was going on. What I heard was just unsettling. It was Mark, whispering to himself, his voice low and almost frantic. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whispering stopped and there was silence. Suddenly, I heard Mark say my name. Sam. I nearly jumped out of my skin. How did he know I was outside his door? Panicking, I quickly tiptoed back to my room, my heart pounding. I crawled into bed trying to make sense of what just happened. Was Mark talking to himself? Or was there something else going on, and how did he know I was there? The next day I couldn't stop thinking about the night before. Mark seemed normal enough when I saw him in the kitchen that morning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As the days went by and the noises from Mark's room persisted, my paranoia only grew. He was still polite, but there was something off about him. He'd give me strange looks, and his movements seemed more erratic. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of whispering. Only this time it wasn't coming from Mark's room. It was coming from right outside my door. I was genuinely freaked out. Was Mark sleepwalking? Or was something more sinister going on? I tiptoed to my door and pressed my ear against it. The whispering stopped. And then, in the silence, I heard Mark say my name again. Sam. This time I responded, "Yeah, you okay?" There was no reply, just the sound of his footsteps walking away back to his room. The next morning, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to confront Mark about his behavior. I waited until we were both home and brought it up casually, asking if he ever sleepwalked or had any kind of sleep disorders. He seemed taken aback at first, but then admitted that he did sometimes sleepwalk. He apologized if he had disturbed me, but something about his explanation didn't sit right with me. My unease grew and I started feeling like I was living with a stranger. I couldn't help but wonder if Mark was hiding something from me. My curiosity got the better of me, and one day, when I knew Mark wouldn't be home, I decided to search his room for answers. I knew it was risky, but I had to know what was going on. I quickly went through his drawers and closet looking for anything that might explain his strange behavior. Just as I was about to give up, I found a small, locked box hidden at the back of his closet. I managed to pry it open, and what I found inside made my blood run cold. It was a collection of photographs, dozens of them, all of me. Most of them were taken while I was asleep, but some were from when I was in my room or in the apartment, completely unaware that I was being photographed. The angles were all different, but the focus was always on me. Some of the photos were so close up that I could see the individual hairs on my face. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized what I was looking at. Mark had been secretly taking pictures of me for who knows how long. I couldn't believe it. I had been living with someone who was clearly obsessed with me, someone who had violated my privacy in the most disturbing way possible. I wanted to confront Mark right then and there, but I was too scared. What if he got violent? I didn't know what he was capable of. Instead, I took pictures of the photos with my phone and grabbed a few of the actual photos as evidence. Then I packed up my things as quickly as I could. The next day, I went to the student housing office and showed them the photos. They were shocked and immediately took action, moving me to another apartment and launching an investigation. I never spoke to Mark again, and I tried to put the whole experience behind me. But even now, years later, I still can't shake the memory of those chilling photographs and the feeling that I was being watched. I never found out what happened to Mark, or why he did what he did. But the experience left a lasting impact on me. I became much more cautious about who I chose to live with, and I never again let my guard down when it came to my privacy. When I first moved to Portland, I was thrilled about starting a new chapter of my life. The city offered everything I wanted: a vibrant culture, great job opportunities, and plenty of activities. All I needed was a decent place to stay, and I thought I'd found the perfect situation with a shared apartment in the heart of the city. My roommate, Alex, seemed like a chill guy. Quiet, respectful, and kept to himself. Little did I know, I was about to enter a nightmare I could never have imagined. The first few weeks were uneventful. Alex and I hardly saw each other due to our opposite work schedules. I worked a typical 9 to 5 at a marketing firm, while Alex often came home late, muttering something about working at a tech startup. Our interactions were brief and polite, and everything seemed fine. The apartment was spacious and well kept, with 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room, and a small kitchen. It was everything I needed to settle into my new life. One night I came home later than usual, after grabbing dinner with friends. As I unlocked the front door, I heard loud noises coming from Alex's room. It sounded like a mix of shouting and banging, accompanied by some kind of aggressive music. I paused, wondering if he had friends over, but when I stepped inside, the apartment was dark except for the light seeping from under Alex's door. I ignored it and headed to my room, figuring it was none of my business. But as the night went on, the noise only got worse. The shouting turned into full-blown screaming, with Alex's voice rising above the music, and what I now recognized as video game sound effects. Curious and slightly concerned, I walked over to his door and knocked softly. The noise stopped abruptly, and for a moment, there was silence. Then the door swung open, revealing Alex, his face flushed and eyes wild. "What?" he snapped, glaring at me. "Hey, I just wanted to see if everything's okay. It sounded like a lot was going on in here," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Alex stared at me for a moment, then scoffed. "I'm fine. Just gaming. It gets intense sometimes." He slammed the door shut without another word, and the noises resumed, even louder than before. I returned to my room, uneasy but willing to chalk it up to an overzealous gamer moment. After all, everyone had their hobbies, right? But as days turned into weeks, Alex's behavior became increasingly erratic. Almost every night the same scenario played out, loud noises, shouting, and aggressive outbursts from behind his closed door. It started affecting my sleep and concentration, making me irritable and tired at work. One evening I decided to have a conversation with Alex about it. I waited until he emerged from his room for a late-night snack. He was still wearing his gaming headset, eyes glazed over as he rummaged through the fridge. "Hey Alex, can we talk for a sec?" I began hesitantly. He glanced at me, pulling off his headset. "What's up?" "I've noticed you've been pretty loud at night with the gaming and all," I said carefully. "It's been hard for me to sleep. Do you think you could keep it down a bit?" Alex's expression darkened. "I'm just playing games. What's the big deal? It's not like I'm throwing parties or anything." "I get that," I replied, trying to stay calm. "But it's getting really disruptive. Maybe you could use headphones or turn down the volume." He huffed, clearly annoyed. "Fine, whatever." He stalked back to his room, slamming the door behind him. I sighed, hoping that would be the end of it. The following night was quieter, and I thought maybe he'd taken my request to heart, but the calm was short-lived. A few days later, the noise returned with a vengeance. This time it wasn't just shouting. I heard crashes and what sounded like something hitting the walls. My heart raced as I realized the situation might be escalating. Concerned for my safety, I texted my friend Maya, who lived nearby. She suggested I call the landlord, Mr. Thompson, to report the disturbances. I hesitated, not wanting to seem like a tattletale, but I knew I couldn't continue living like this. I dialed Mr. Thompson's number, explaining the situation as calmly as I could. He listened and promised to speak with Alex the next day. True to his word, Mr. Thompson visited the apartment the following morning. I stayed in my room, listening to the muffled conversation through the door. Alex's voice was defensive, but Mr. Thompson was firm, reminding him of the building's noise policies. When the door finally closed behind our landlord, I breathed a sigh of relief, hoping that would be the end of the chaos. For a couple of days things were quiet, but then it all came crashing down, literally. It was a Friday night and I had decided to stay in and relax. As I lounged on the couch, I heard the familiar sounds of Alex gaming, but something felt different. The noises were sharper, angrier. Suddenly there was a loud crash followed by a string of curses. I jumped up alarmed and ran to Alex's door. Before I could knock, the door burst open, and Alex stormed out, his face twisted in rage. "Are you happy now?" he shouted, gesturing wildly. "Thanks to you and your complaints, I'm banned from my game server." I blinked, taken aback. "What are you talking about?" He was seething, barely able to contain his anger. "My team kicked me out because they said I was being too aggressive, and it's all your fault." He slammed his fist against the wall, making me flinch. "Alex, calm down," I said, trying to defuse the situation. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." But he wasn't listening. He continued ranting, his face red with fury. Suddenly, he grabbed a lamp from the hallway table and threw it across the room. It shattered against the wall, sending shards of glass everywhere. My heart pounded as I realized how dangerous the situation had become. "That's it," I said, backing away. "I'm calling the police." For a moment, something flickered in Alex's eyes. Fear, maybe. But it was quickly replaced by anger. He turned on his heel and stormed back into his room, slamming the door so hard it shook the walls. With trembling hands, I called 911. The police arrived within minutes, and I explained the situation. They knocked on Alex's door, speaking to him in calm, authoritative tones. After a tense few moments, Alex emerged, his face pale and his demeanor subdued. The officers escorted him out, explaining that he would need to leave the premises and find another place to stay. I felt a mixture of relief and guilt as Alex was taken away. I hadn't wanted things to escalate this far, but I knew I had done the right thing. The next morning, as I cleaned up the mess from the shattered lamp, I reflected on the whole ordeal. Living with a nightmare roommate had been exhausting and frightening, but it had also taught me the importance of setting boundaries and standing up for myself.